So my name is Kevin Hainsmith, part of the Alliance Party Guernsey.
John Gollop, independent candidate.
And Adrian Dilcock, independent candidate. Ross Brun, independent candidate.
Independent American.
Well, I think we're just doing these three for just this one.
Right.
Sorry. So I'm Eva from the campaign group Guerns Against Discrimination, and this is Lexi from Liberate, and we're just each going to ask you a question, if that's okay. For the legislation to be effective, do you think people need to be informed and businesses need access to training? Sorry, that's for the anti-discrimination legislation.
First of all, I mean, what the states have actually agreed is that the policy has been agreed, but the legislation has to come back. And I think it's actually a start. There are some discrimination that they haven't gone into. Just for the record, I'm anti all forms of discrimination. So I think, yes, you will have to start training people. I mean, it's like training people in anything else. Some businesses will have to be trained in how to do this because it's a cultural change, I think. I mean, there are people that wouldn't even think of discrimination, and there are people that do it unconsciously and they'll have to be taught really how to not behave themselves, but actually put themselves into a new frame of mind.
Yeah, so we're jogging along in the right direction, but what is frustrating actually has been the budget for the education and the public awareness has been over the years significantly contracted. Now, the Chief President Gerard, Gavin Sapir, is actually very committed to equality, said in the debate that he'd like to see an equality rights organisation. We want that on employment social security, but it didn't happen because there was resistance from the business community and probably a majority of policy resources and senior figures. And that's frustrating because what we have in the interim, it will be an improved and empowered employment and rights tribunal format. But that isn't quite what we need to really deliver a message of equality and a parity with, you know, we've got an international identity in terms of finance and intellectual property. We need to establish the same criteria as a society.
To move on to
So I'm also against all forms of discrimination. The party's stance is we're trying to accelerate the discrimination legislation when it gets through. Well, when it gets debated again. I think the timeline discussed is too short. Personally, I think they could quite easily cut that by 50%. All you need to do is look at other jurisdictions, for example, the UK. In terms of educating businesses, I think there needs to be a hub in terms of actually educating businesses because they're pretty much frightened over the discrimination law. But at the same time, it's one of those whereby, in my view, when the law does come in, there's a clear framework for them to work with.
Sorry to cut you off, I just want to get to Lex.
Sorry, I'm going to have to ask the next question and then, so in regards to the discrimination legislation, trans is one of the characteristics that isn't in there at the moment, but it's likely to come up. And the question I have is in regards to the legislation, how will you respond to the challenge of trans people in single-sex spaces such as toilets, changing rooms, the refuge, because this has always become quite heated in debate, and we just want to know how you'll look at that.
I support the trans community, so I have no issue for them using single-sex bathrooms or anything like that.
That's a hard one because we were divided even on, though we had unity on the Employment Social Security Committee on that, and I respect the position that some other candidates are taking, and J.K. Rowling, the writer, has taken, but I think on balance I try to work with the position Kevin's outlining of supporting the trans community, because after all we're very British in some of our thinking, but as soon as you go across to France, for example, the toilets are integrated. The same would be true of Northern Europe. So I think we actually need to overcome our barriers here.
That's nasty.
At the side of you there, Netty's
Oh,
gone.
hello. Yes, my name's Jonathan Crossan and I'm a candidate for the next coming election.
All right, thank you very much.
Oh.
My name's Laura Rodger and I'm representing the Guernsey.
And I'm Lexi representing Liberate.
And my question really is about the legislation has now been agreed to be written and it's away with the officers. And we expect it to come back in the new states, as you well know. So you've now been once you've been voted into the states. How are you going to support that legislation to go through?
It's self-evidently the right thing to do. It will be in the queue, however, with lots of other pieces of legislation, some of which will be to do with funding and making sure that we've got the funding to implement.
So do you see that as a barrier?
I can see it as a potential barrier. It's just that it's one of those many causes, if you like, that I think it's a pity they haven't been addressed already, because you know, in the queue. But there's no, I mean, undoubtedly, it should be or should have been a priority. But I can see, just because of the fact that it's been needed for so long. But I just see it as part of on a long list of items that need to be addressed.
And you don't see it as a priority?
Well, I do see it as a priority. It's one of many. I'm just wondering where it's going to. You know, when we come to it, and I agree, we're going to need to be much more decisive about how we get things done. I'm certainly hoping. It's certainly my intention that in a new assembly that we adopt a more effective style of government, which would actually help to get pieces of legislation through that are just either waiting to be drafted or have been drafted and are just waiting to be enacted.
I'll rescue from this question with another difficult one.
I didn't expect them to be easy.
So in regards to the discrimination legislation, we know that trans has been challenging at times, and it's not in there at the moment as a characteristic, but it's going to come back. And one of the biggest challenges is how will you respond to the challenge of trans people and single-sex spaces, i.e. restrooms, toilets, changing rooms. Do you see it? Just how do you see it? That's the best thing.
Clearly, it's a difficult issue because I think there are some members of some parts of society that find that difficult. That you know, when you have those shared areas, you know, which are obviously quite sensitive, and yet somebody is in transition, and they're using a certain gender type of facility. I just, you know, it may be one of those things that will have to be discussed before implementation, because I just see that it's going to be contentious. I don't see it as something that can be just where you can expect a straightforward vote on it. Again, I wouldn't want too much state's time to get absorbed in detail like that, as you'll appreciate, and for those that are concerned, I can perfectly appreciate that it's extremely important to them, it's extremely important to their identity and sense of well-being. But I just see it as such a contentious area that it's going to be very difficult to implement. But there may be, if there are ways around it, I'd like to see. I'd like to hear of them. I just see. Yeah. No, I would agree. I'm open to all ideas about how to do this because we're in a community like this. It's a small community. Very difficult. Facilities are under a great deal of pressure. But I think if I'm looking for ways of how we can do this.
Thank you.
Mark Dorry.
Hello, I'm Adrian Gabriel.
Hello, I'm Sarah Huntsman-Ruxell.
Hello, I'm Laura Rodger and I'm here representing Equality Guernsey.
And I'm Lexi representing Liberate.
And my question is regarding the legislation. As you know, there's been an agreement by the states that the legislation is going to be written, but that's just a starting point. It's been a really good starting point. But what we want to know from you, and you've only got about 45 seconds each to say, how are you going to support this legislation through the next state and make sure it gets enacted? I need you.
So, resources. It's really important that we keep the staff that have been developing the legislation need to be kept in place and the resources provided so that we can actually hit the ground running and get the legislation to the states, within the time frame, hopefully before. But it's that resource. That's the only way that it's going to get through.
For me, it's about understanding, making sure that it's relevant, fit for purpose. So I would promote more resourcing, as Sarah said, into investigation and making sure that the legislation is going to be fit for purpose, not only now but in the future.
It's a matter of prioritisation and expectation of what the states can do. So it's prioritisation of the legal draftsmen in terms of developing the law, and also the staff at Social Security, which have to work together with the legal draftsmen. And it's our expectation of that they're going to prioritise this. We can't demand that they do other things. That there's limited to what else they can do, because they need to achieve this 2022 date which we've set out. So it's just prioritisation and expectation, and it's also making sure that we elect the people on Social Security who will give it the prioritisation, and we have a proper system of checking on the prioritisation of legislation.
Thank you. The next question, as we know, trans isn't in there as a characteristic at the moment, but it's likely to come back, and every time it does, there's always a bit of heated debate on this topic, and I'd like to know how you deal with it. So, in regards to the discrimination legislation, how will you respond to the challenges of trans people in single-sex spaces, and that includes toilets, changing rooms, etc. And sort of, what's your opinion on that?
I don't have a detailed knowledge. I'm not going to try to, but I accept that there's a programme which there's phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, and I think we just have to continue with that programme. But I'm not going to try and bluff my way through saying I'm an expert and I've put enough thought into it. But I just accept there's a programme, and we have to, once we've done phase 1, move into phase 2 in order to achieve and I think it's in phase 2, if I recall correctly.
Hey, Adrian. So again, I'm similar to Mark's position. I don't really have enough information, but I would like to hope that wherever any member of our society is, be it in the public realm, that they're comfortable and able to function as they choose.
So in the consultation document, there was quite an open-minded way of dealing with that, which involved the ERO at the time, making nuanced decisions on what has become an over debated. Debates, rights shouldn't be a debate, but it has blown up into something. And I thought that the original consultation was quite a good point to start. It did receive a lot of pushback, but I think now that we have the opportunity to look towards that phase, I think revisiting what the purpose of that is, and we will have the benefit, hopefully, of having some an ERO already set up, so an understanding of how that would function and how putting single-sex spaces and trying to balance the rights of both sides.
So I think it's in phase 3. I'm just looking it up. It's not in phase 2.
Who knows where things will be
Brought forward 25 to 26
I'm Lindsay, to summarise.
Sam Haskins.
Steve Farr.
Hi, I'm Lauren Barker. I'm representative of Guernsey. Sorry, I've lost it. Equality Guernsey. Sorry.
And I'm Lexi from Liberate. And
yeah, my question is, as you know, the legislation has now been agreed that it can go ahead and it's been written, and what we'd like to know is how are you going to support that legislation to happen, and what do you think about how we're going to support people to understand what's happening? Lindsay.
Okay, so I'm a sitting deputy, so I've always been very supportive of, I've been through the whole trials and tribulations from before this term. I remember being in the hustings before the previous election, and being in that moment where everyone was so excited because we had thought that it was going somewhere, and then there was that whole deflation thing where it didn't, and then we've been through the ups and downs of this political term where we started off with a narrow focus and really widened it out and then had to bring it back and then phase it. So been through all of that. So, better late than never. It has taken far too long. Historically, the problem was not necessarily the availability of the financial resources, but actually the human resources, the skills and expertise in order to get that work moving. So really, eventually found some really good people to do that work, and I'm really glad that those people are staying on to actually get the legislation written. So in theory, we've got a nice timetable set out, we've got the resources in place, we've got the expertise in place. So is there anything we wouldn't hear? Touch wood. We just hold feet to the fire and we make sure it gets done. I think the fact, one thing that made an absolutely palpable difference was the community engagement with all of that. And I think the community debate, and I can say this from a climate change point of view as well, made all the difference in the world. And it was absolutely palpable to go into. Sorry, right, finish that sentence.
So what I can say is that I won't stop it, that's for sure. I absolutely agree with it, and all of this, it's been very progressive, and it's where we should be as well. Why haven't we been in the past? We've already done it. So I guess that's my commitment, is that I won't hinder it. I'll try and help it. When you say what exactly I'll do, that's where I'll struggle. I think we all need to understand why. Was it just because someone then came in and said, "Oh, but what about this?" Was it a resource issue? So was that in the drafting process? If so, then I think there's a bigger problem there, because if we do have that issue, all of the things that we put in, how do we make sure they get done and get done timely? So if that's an issue, I think we need to look at that with quite some urgency, because we need to be agile and adapt, and right now that's a big issue, so that must be our focus. So whatever we decide needs to be brought in quickly.
And Steve?
Yeah, okay, so I'm, like Sam, I'm a newcomer to candidacy, so I'm not a sitting States member. And I'm therefore unclear exactly how the process works, but I suppose the risk to you guys is that you kind of fall either side of two different assemblies. And so there is the possibility, I guess, that when the legislation comes back, am I right here? Yeah. That some of the new people might say, well, we weren't part of agreeing to this in the first place, so what's going on? I'm also aware, I sit on the Institute Directors Committee, please don't hate me, so I'm also aware that some of the business community were unhappy with some elements of the planned legislation, and that there was quite a lot of pushback at one point. However, I think having got this far, I can really see no reason why anyone should really particularly want to take a step back.
Jump into the next
Reverse.
question.
Yeah, please.
So also, one of the characteristics that's going to come back that isn't included at the moment is trans, and one of the biggest questions is trans people and this always comes up and it complicates things. Looking at trans people in regards to single-sex spaces and how the legislation is going to deal with that and how look at it. So we're talking about toilets, changing rooms, and sort of where we're going to go with that. Probably start with Lindsay.
Yeah, so you're right. It's going to come back, and I know I sound like a bit of a broken record, but I'm always very reticent to put any kind of opinion before I've seen sort of preempt debates, because it's really important that we don't do that. But I can categorically say that obviously trans rights are as important as everyone else's rights, because especially because actually of the historic discrimination and starting from a more discriminated base. So I'm looking forward to that coming back, because I think it's really important that we do. Is it possible to get a green?
Yeah, I struggle. I mean, I understand with why people have worried in the past, but that's in that environment. If you think about it, if someone is identified as a woman for that long, it would be as odd for me to go into a female toilet as a female going into a man's toilet. I personally think that we shouldn't stop it. We should. I do look forward to the debate, but I'm very much for trans rights.
We'll have to move.
I'm kind of lazy in the sense that I would need to see the wording, but it seems a logical extension of what
Yes. And I would just say on that point, I very much hope that it would not be a horrible device. I would very much hope that Guernsey does not have to descend into horrible debates on that subject.
It's probably
well, no.